Final years. Hope you all are doing well. Yes? Final years, can you hear me? Okay, so are you all doing well? How are you all doing? Good to be with you again. And see you soon, inshallah. हालात बेहतर हो गए, inshallah we'll meet soon. But till the college opens, we have to put up with the Zoom meetings and Zoom lectures. Even the clinicals we are trying to do it on the Zoom, and I know it's not going to be an ideal class because we are not in touch with the patients, and we are not doing face-to-face discussions. So like, I would like this to be an interactive class, final years, and this is great that you people respond on the chat. So that's wonderful. If you have any questions, any comments, just please put it on the chat, and so we can try to make this interactive as much as possible. Okay. Okay, so today's class topic is vaginal discharge, and I think this is a very important and a very common topic. I don't know how many of you have seen patients coming in with this complaint in the clinics, because I know you people have been missing your clinics also. So, like, you used to go to the OPD and take histories, that's not happening now. But would you, anybody like to tell me whether they have ever taken a history for vaginal discharge? Any patient in the ward or in the OPD?
मैडम
Has,
हमसे लड़की बताएगी। आप जो पूछ रही है वेजाइनल डिस्चार्ज के बारे में, आपने पेशेंट से हिस्ट्री ली हो, लड़की बताएगी हमें अपने बारे में? लड़की की
हाँ,
बताएगी ना। तो ये सवाल हमसे लड़कों से ना।
चैट पे बताएं.
आप
Yes or
चलो
no?
ये
Have you
चलो
ever
ये
taken a history
तो देख लेना
for
कौन
a patient coming
होगा
in with
लड़की
vaginal discharge?
नहीं देते नहीं कौन भाई,
Anybody? Any final year student?
कोई नहीं बताएगा लड़की के बारे में। मैडम बोलती रही ये उनकी बेटी एमली शाह की, तो ये
Yes?
बोलती है। नहीं भाई, नफीसा शाह की एक और है, उसकी नुसरत शाह, ये एमली शाह की बूढ़ी है।
Have you ever seen a patient with vaginal discharge?
नो मैडम।
Any experience? I just want to know if anybody of you has any experience
मैम
of a
इस
patient,
मैम
or if you can
स्टूडेंट
recall
मैम
a
स्टूडेंट म्यूट
patient
कर दूं?
complaining of vaginal discharge.
मैम स्टूडेंट म्यूट कर दूं?
Huh?
स्टूडेंट म्यूट कर दूं? मैम मतलब जिसको भी कोई चैट पे बात करनी होगी तो मतलब किसी भी कोई क्वेश्चन वगैरह होगा तो वो चैट पर आ जाएंगे।
हाँ.
ठीक है
I am
मैम।
communicating on the chat, right?
यस मैम।
Okay, so that's great. Ramsha has said yes. I'm sure there must be other students also.
म्यूट कर दो। मैम आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए अपने आप को। जी मैम, हो गए।
Yes.
ठीक है।
Okay, so that's great. Okay, so let's look at the objectives of today's class. So by the end of this session, I would expect that final year students should be able to explain the difference between and what is disease. So we are not going to talk about pelvic inflammatory disease, because today's topic is about basically vaginal discharge, but just the difference, because sometimes there might be confusion about what is pelvic inflammatory disease and what is vaginal infection. So just the explanation about how to differentiate about that. And I would also like final year students to be able to discuss what is the differential diagnosis of different causes of vaginal discharge with the help of history. History alone should be able to differentiate between different causes of vaginal discharge and different types of infection also. So history is the main important thing, most important thing that we are going to stress upon and talk about in detail. And finally, students should also be able to describe the important points in the history and also in examination. And they should be able to describe the management of abnormal vaginal discharge according to the cause. Depending on what infection it is, they should be able to tell us the basic management options or the treatment that should be offered to the patient. So these are the simple objectives about uh, what should final year be able to do after this class. Differential diagnosis, different causes of vaginal discharge, important points in the history and examination, and they should be able to talk about management according to the cause of vaginal discharge. Okay. Okay, so again, like I said, it's a very, very common symptom, very, very common complaint in reproductive age women who present to the gynae OPD. And almost every woman, even if they don't present with this complaint, once you ask them about vaginal discharge, most of them will say yes. So some kind of vaginal discharge, most of the women will be having, although most of them have normal vaginal discharge, and sometimes they may have pathological due to infection or due to other causes. So basically, we can divide them into two. That is physiological vaginal discharge and pathological. And then pathological can be further divided into non-infective and infective causes. We will further talk about what is non-infective and what is infective. And then it's important to realize that it's a very subjective symptom. Every patient takes it differently. Even a normal discharge can be bothersome to some women, and even abnormal vaginal discharge may not be bothersome to some women who may tolerate it. So it's a very subjective symptom. Unless we test for abnormality, unless the patient thinks that she has a problem, she will not come to the clinic. So because it is a very subjective symptom, so it can affect the woman's quality of life depending upon how they take it. If they take it as a very serious problem, even a normal discharge can be bothering them, and it can affect their social life, it can affect their marital life, and the quality of overall normal life can be affected because of vaginal discharge. And so it's a very common public health problem, very, very common, but it has to be taken in an appropriate way. There should be no unnecessary treatment for physiological discharge. That is the main point that should be emphasized, that most of the discharge is physiological and should not be treated. The women only need to be aware of that. So what is the most common cause of vaginal discharge? So we just talked about it. What do you think finally? What is the most common cause of vaginal discharge? Anyone? Any answers? Anybody would like to answer this on the chat? What is the most common cause of vaginal discharge? Physiological. Yes, physiological. That's great. Most of the discharge is physiological. Around, I would say 60 to 70% of vaginal discharge is physiological. But because 30% cases are pathological, so the important thing is to always rule out pathology before we can say that, oh, this is normal, or this is physiological discharge, because the patient has come to you with a problem and we need to rule out if there's any before we can say that this is physiological and this does not require any specific treatment. So that's good. So ovulation, yes. So physiological is due to ovulation, and we'll talk about it. So how to classify? Like we said, classification of vaginal discharge into two big categories, that is pathological and physiological. So pathological is further divided into infective, yes. So there are two basic categories: physiological and pathological. And pathological is further divided into infective and non-infective. So non-infective would be the causes of discharge which are due to any genital tract pathology, which can be cervical cancer, which can be cervicitis, which can be cervical polyps, endometrial polyps, any pathology in the genital tract. If they give rise to vaginal discharge, that is labeled as non-infective because that's due to some genital tract pathology. If there is an infective cause, that is divided into further into sexually transmitted infections and non-sexually transmitted infections. So the STIs and non-STIs basically, again further divided into, STIs are further divided into three, that is Trichomonas vaginalis, that three causative organisms which can cause sexually transmitted infections, and these are Trichomonas, Gonococcus and Chlamydia. And non-STIs, which are also cause vaginal discharge, these are very common infections. One is bacterial vaginosis and the other one is candidiasis. So these are not supposed to be sexually transmitted, but they are due to change in the endogenous organisms which are already present inside the vagina. So basically, it's important to remember that infection in the vagina can be due to 5 organisms. These are the 5 organisms that you will be talking about. Even in the exam, when you have a patient, when you're taking a history of vaginal discharge, you have to keep these 5, because when you talk about treatment, you will be asked about treatment for any of these 5 organisms, and you should know what is the treatment for each one of this. Diagnosis, what is the points in history, what is the diagnosis, and how do you treat each one of these 5 organisms. There won't be any other organism apart from these 5 infections, okay? So when we treat all 5, or we treat individually. Is this chart clear to you all, finalists? The division of vaginal discharge into pathological and physiological, first of all, and then pathology is further divided into 2 categories, that is infective and non-infective. And then infection is further divided into STIs and non-STIs, and there are different varieties of organisms that cause sexually transmitted infections and non-sexually transmitted infections. Are we clear with this? Okay? Yes, good. So let's talk about physiological discharge or normal vaginal discharge, because as you said, this is the most common type of vaginal discharge. And why does it occur? Most of the time, it occurs due to influence of menstrual cycle hormones, or the hormones coming from the ovary, that is estrogen and progesterone. So there are different levels of these hormones throughout the menstrual cycle. So there will be a change in this physiological discharge according to the levels of these hormones, and there will be variation in the type of discharge throughout the cycle. And you can further ask the patient about what kind of discharge do they experience, and what is the normal flora of the vagina which is present, that is lactobacilli. This is an important friendly bacteria, or a good bacteria, which maintains the pH of the vagina in the acidic range, that is 3.8 to 4.4, which is the most important factor which discourages infection normally. If the normal flora is surviving and thriving inside the vagina, this is good, because this maintains the acidic pH, and this avoids infection or discourages infection. So what kind of infection, what kind of discharge is this? How will the patient explain this? If you ask them about the discharge, they will say it's white or clear. And if you ask them about the smell, they will say there's usually no smell, or there's a particular type of odor which is not bad odor, which maybe there might be some patient might be feeling some kind of smell, but it should not be a bad odor like infection. And if you ask them further about the menstrual cycle, the nature of the discharge will change, whether it is follicular phase or luteal phase. The color might change little. It might become clear, or it might become more opaque, and the consistency of the discharge will be different according to whether it's under progesterone influence or under estrogen influence. So if the patient explains it like that, that is clear and it's not very particularly offensive and it varies with menstrual cycle, then this is normal discharge or physiological discharge. Most of the girls get upset about this discharge and they will present with this complaint, but usually they just require to be counseled. We just need to tell them, okay, you don't worry, this is not infection, particularly unmarried girls. If you get an unmarried patient and she presents with this kind of discharge and she says, okay, I can't read namaz, I can't keep my fast, and I'm having this discharge all the time, and this is napak or something like that. So, because sexually transmitted infections usually don't occur in unmarried girls, so we are not expecting that she should have any pathological discharge or any infection. Most of the time, this is physiological discharge. So we just need to explain and counsel them that this is fine and no treatment is required, and you don't have to worry about this. This is not napak. She can do her prayers, she can say her namaz, she can do her fast, everything, and she doesn't have to worry. Because what happens is they go to the GP usually and they say they have vaginal discharge, and what will the GP do? What will the GP do? Tell me. If a young girl goes to a GP and says she has vaginal discharge all the time throughout her menstrual cycle, what is the GP going to do? What treatment they will start? Anybody? Antibiotics. Very good. Excellent. So this is what is normally happening. They give them a list of antibiotics. They will start Flagyl, they will start other Augmentin and other antibiotics. And what will be the outcome of this unnecessary antibiotic therapy? The antibiotics are going to kill the normal flora. That the lactobacilli are going to be killed, and that will change the vaginal pH. And then which infection will occur after this? If the normal acidic medium of the vagina is changed because of killing of lactobacilli with unnecessary antibiotics, then the patient she will be actually developing fungal infection. Very good. This is excellent. Mohammed Junaid, yes, that's an excellent answer. So then she will come with candidiasis. And usually patients have a lot of candidiasis, which is due to unnecessary antibiotic therapy, because we are killing the normal flora which are protecting the vagina. Yes, candidiasis. Excellent, Ramsha. Yes. So it's important not to unnecessarily treat normal physiological discharge, and to counsel the patient and to reassure her that this is fine. She can go ahead with her prayers, and she should not feel that this is not good or this is napak. This is absolutely fine and physiological. Okay, that's great. Okay, so what are the non-infective causes? A lot of times there can be some pathology in the vaginal area or cervical area or in the genital tract, and we must rule out this cause before we say this is infection and there is no pathology. So how do we rule out pathology? First of all, we take history about the duration, about the type of discharge, about even sometimes tampons, because tampons can also be retained and they can cause infection sometimes, which is a foreign body reaction to tampons, and this can cause a very bad infection. And sometimes patients use chemicals, sometimes they use lotions or creams which can cause irritation and they can cause allergic response. But sometimes there is a real pathology, like this picture is showing you. What does this picture show you? Can you see the picture? Can anybody diagnose? These are cervical polyps, yes. And this is a very important cause of, non-infective cause of vaginal discharge. This polyp, usually cervical polyp, but sometimes it can be, yes, excellent, cervical polyp. Very good. Tareem has also answered, so that's excellent. And sometimes it can be a fibroid polyp also, because if this is submucosal fibroid inside the uterus, which can protrude out from the cervix and come out into the vagina, which can get ulcerated due to sexual intercourse, and once it gets ulcerated, it gets infected, and it can cause vaginal discharge due to secondary infection can occur due to the ulcers and due to infection of cervical polyp, or it can occur due to infection of fibroid polyps also. But sometimes it can be a serious disease like cancer. So we must rule out, before we say this is just infection, we must rule out all these causes through our history and through our physical exam. And particularly we can do a per speculum examination. If you have seen a per speculum examination, anybody can tell me which speculum do we use to inspect the cervix? Has anybody seen the speculum in the OPD? Because sometimes that speculum is kept in your exam, and you have to identify that instrument. That's a very important instrument for examination. And for Cusco speculum, very good. So this has come from Ramsha. So it's not Sims, yes, Seth. This is not Sims, this is Cusco's. And I'm sorry I've not put a picture of that, but you must see the picture of Cusco's in order to identify. Because what happens in the OSCE, that they keep both the speculum. We keep the Sims also, and we keep the Cusco's also. And then we ask the students to identify which one is Cusco's and which one is Sims, and what is the indication for them. So you must be very clear about what does a Cusco speculum look like and what does a Sims speculum look like, because this can be your whole station of OSCE Viva or OSCE station. And usually if we want to inspect the cervix in the OPD, we use Cusco's forceps, Cusco speculum, in order to inspect the cervix, and we can see any polyp or any cancer, any growth over the cervix, any mass, any tumor, fungating growth. Tomorrow I think we have a class on cervical cancer also, so we will be talking more about that. But that's a very important pathology which can give rise to vaginal discharge. And most of the patients complain of, along with bleeding, abnormal bleeding, they will also complain that they have foul smelling vaginal discharge, which is due to secondary infection of the cancer. And if we put the speculum in, Cusco speculum, we can see the growth over the cervix, which will be a fungating and very bad looking infected growth, which is usually it is cancer. So other causes can be sometimes the intrauterine device, if it has not been put in a aseptic condition, if the insertion is not sterile or under aseptic conditions, it can cause infection and discharge. And sometimes postmenopausal patients complain of vaginal discharge, which is due to lack of estrogen deficiency, and atrophic changes of the vagina. So that needs to be, all these causes need to be ruled out before we can say this is infection and before we can treat infection. Okay. So let's come to the infective causes now. What are the infective causes? Like we said, there are two categories. One is sexually transmitted and the other one is non-sexually transmitted. And what is the most common among these? Can anybody tell me, among these infections, which one is the most common that we see in the clinical practice? Anybody? Bacterial vaginosis. Okay, so that's right. Candida and bacterial vaginosis. That's fine. Okay, that's very good, because actually there is a sort of confusion which is the most common. Some literature says bacterial vaginosis is the most common, and the other one says candidiasis is most common, because candidiasis is very common in pregnancy also. If you count that also, then of course candidiasis becomes very common. But again, bacterial vaginosis is also a very, very common infection, and a lot of literature will tell you that bacterial vaginosis is the most common. So it's not very important. We are not going to argue about that. Most of the literature might say bacterial vaginosis, but candidiasis is also very common. Maybe we can say second commonest is candidiasis. And STIs, it's important to rule out STI in every reproductive age woman, particularly if she is sexually active. So what comes in the history, what the important point in the history when you're taking a history is to take a sexual history always. Whether the woman is, if she's a married woman, again, we have to take a detailed sexual histories in order to know the risk factors for STIs. And when we talk about the treatment, then we'll further talk about each of these organisms. So a lot of times there is mixed infection. because most of the time we don't do cultures, we don't do any special culture media, which is not most of the time available. So lot of times there might be mixed infection, because if we are suspecting STI, there can be two STI or there can be all three STI together also. Because if there is a risk of sexually transmitted infection, there can be a mixed infection, and this can also be a mixed infection between non-STI and STI. So then we have to treat all of the infections together, all 5 organisms together sometimes. Most of the time we have to do that actually. And sometimes it is a non-specific specific infection and we can't diagnose what it is, but again we treat all of them together. So this was one of the objectives of our lecture. What is the difference between vaginitis and PID? Anybody? Can anybody respond to this? Difference between vaginitis and PID. Can we call vaginitis that this is PID, pelvic inflammatory disease? Or is there a difference? What is in your mind? I want to know what is in the minds of the students before we further discuss. PID is spread infection above. PID is spread infection above the vagina. Okay, that's very good. This is Umme Salma. PID is a group of diseases. Okay. So I think the concept is correct basically. PID involves whole pelvic viscera. Very good. While vaginitis is confined to vagina. That's excellent. PID involves the upper genital tract. Very good. It involves the ovaries also. Okay, that's fine. That's excellent. So I'm really happy that you have the right concept. That's the correct concept, because sometimes even a lot of doctors also confuse that vaginitis means this is PID and patient has got PID and she will not be able to conceive or things like that. So it's very important to understand that vaginitis is limited to vagina. That means only vaginal infection. And PID is actually it's the inflammation of the upper genital tract, like you said. That was absolutely correct answer. And it starts from the cervix. It usually does not start from the vagina. The infection usually starts from the endocervix, and then it spreads upwards through the endometrium. So first it causes cervicitis, then it causes endometritis, it goes up into the uterus, then it goes through the fallopian tubes and causes salpingitis, and then it spreads to the pelvic peritoneum and to the ovaries, and it causes salpingo-oophorytis or oophorytis, and then it spreads throughout the peritoneum, and then it causes peritonitis. So PID involves the upper genital tract, and it's very important to differentiate from the vaginitis. And the patient will present with abdominal pain. In vaginitis, patient will not present with abdominal pain, because it's not going to the upper genital tract. It's limited to the vagina and only vaginal discharge, usually not associated with abdominal pain. Okay? Because the abdominal pain will only occur if the infection has ascended up and involved the pelvic peritoneum. So here the answer is, like you all answered correctly, infection of the vagina is vaginitis, and like we answered, it can be, the causes can be non-infective and infective, and the infection can be STI or non-STI, but the STI causes of vaginitis are involving the cervix. So two of the organisms, we will further discuss the two organisms like gonococcus and chlamydia, which also cause vaginitis, but they can cause ascending infection also. From the cervix, they can ascend up into the upper genital tract and they can cause PID, and later on they can cause tubal blockage, they can cause infertility, and they can also cause ectopic pregnancy and chronic pelvic pain. Okay, so PID is basically infection of starting from the two organisms which are usually responsible for PID. We all know that they are gonococcus and chlamydia. So first of all, they cause endocervicitis, and then endometritis, and then salpingitis, and then oophorytis, and then pelvic peritoneum is involved and peritonitis. So this patient who has PID, she might present with any of the symptoms of pelvic pain. She might present with infertility, which is due to tubal block, and she might present with ectopic pregnancy as a first presentation, or she might present with chronic pelvic pain due to salpingitis and due to peritonitis. So, which PID is most common in Pakistan? Finally, can anybody tell me? Which kind of PID patients present with usually infertility when they come with infertility to our clinic? So, which infection or which causative organism is responsible for tubal block and infertility? And we are talking about the context of Pakistan. You are right that chlamydia is the most important, but excellent. Amna Majid, this is excellent. TB is the most common in Pakistan. Although chlamydia and gonorrhea are right answers when we talk about internationally, overall they are the commonest. But if we talk in the context of Pakistan and our own patients who present with infertility and tubal block, that is usually due to childhood tuberculosis, because we know that TB is very, very common in Pakistan. And when you take history from the patient कि आपको TB तो नहीं हुआ था बचपन में, most of the time patient will give history of TB, and sometimes they say they did not suffer from TB themselves, but they have a family history, and even family history is very, very significant. We must always take family history of tuberculosis, because that will cause, usually we are all exposed to subclinical infection due to our patients, and anytime it can, TB has a preference for tubes. Whenever it goes into the blood, it goes into the tubes and it causes damage to the fallopian tubes and causes salpingitis and it causes infertility. So that's a very important cause of PID in Pakistan. Okay, so how do we evaluate a patient coming in with vaginal discharge? So I think this is the most important slide that we will be discussing. The most important evaluation of patients coming with vaginal discharge. How do we evaluate? The most important intervention or the tool that we have is always, which can never be overemphasized, is history, right? So we usually diagnose with the help of history, and then physical exam is done just to confirm our differential diagnosis, because the differential diagnosis should come on the history, and most of the time you're also able to diagnose the exact causative organism also, but not always. You will have some idea about what kind of discharge it is from the history, but examination is also a very important part. Investigation, I think, is the least important part of diagnosis of vaginal discharge, because most of the time we are not able to do endocervical swabs, because the culture medium for gonococcus is not available in Pakistan, and culture medium for chlamydia is also not available. So we cannot rule out sexually transmitted organisms. So we have to depend upon the history and examination. And if you ask me what is the most important, I think you people know that most important evaluation is always the history. And even in the exam, you will be limited to taking history. You will not be asked to do examination, although you might be asked about what examination is important theoretically, but you might get a patient, or you might get a role play for taking history of vaginal discharge. And how do you ask? So how do you take history? So you ask about the history of discharge, what type of discharge it is, what is the duration of discharge, what is the amount of discharge, what is the color of discharge, and any associated symptoms like bleeding, like itching, like soreness, like pain, like dyspareunia, any associated symptoms. That's also very important. And then sexual history is important, because we said 3 of the organisms are sexually transmitted organisms, and if you want to rule out, we must take sexual history, which is the most important history, and usually it is missed out because doctors feel embarrassed to take sexual history, and they don't feel very competent enough to take sexual history, and then the patients also will not they will not actually talk about sexual history unless the doctor talks about it. Because imagine if the doctor is not comfortable about taking sexual history, how would the patient be able to talk about it? It's a very, very intimate question, very, very personal and private question. So the doctors need to be comfortable with the patient in asking sexual history so that the patient feels confident. Ki, haan, doctor is asking me, so I have to tell her. If the doctor doesn't ask about it, then they will not volunteer and they will not say that they have sexual problem or their husband has a sexual problem. They will not come forward with it. So I think it's most important to understand how to take a sexual history, and you have to be very, very understanding and very, very tactful, very, very respectful with the patient in order to give her confidence so that she can confide in you and tell you about the personal problem and intimate problems if she's suffering from anything, right? So this is a very important part of history, sexual history, in order to outline whether she has any STI or not. Because always remember, when we talk about sexual history, keep in mind about HIV also, and keep in mind about hepatitis also. Although they are not causes of vaginal discharge usually, but if we are suspecting any STI, then we must try to rule out HIV also, both in the patient as well as in her partner or in her husband, and also try to rule out hepatitis. So that screening will be a part of your workup for STIs, because these are very important STIs which should not be missed out, and the counseling about protection and transmission, that discussion should also be done if we are suspecting an STI. Okay, so we'll talk further about the history I'll give you a couple of case scenarios also. So we will talk more about history in those case scenarios. Right now, we have to further move on to physical exam. So in physical exam, once we have taken a history, we will try to inspect what kind of discharge it is. And for inspection, most important is your naked eye examination, because you might see the discharge. When you do a vulval inspection, the discharge might be visible on the vulva, particularly if it is. So there is a question. Let me see. What is the question? What specific questions to be asked? What specific questions to be asked in the sexual history? Okay. So what can anybody answer this? What specific question should be asked? This is a very, very important question, and we must try to answer it at this point. Can anybody answer me? Any other students? Can you volunteer about this answer before I talk about it? What specific questions to be asked in sexual history of PID? What do you think? This is Risha. What do you think yourself? I would like you to answer also. Try to answer yourself. What do you think? What is the most important? Because I think you know. Yes. Okay. So dyspareunia is very important. What else? Type of discharge is also very important. Okay, so if it is a pussy discharge, purulent discharge, foul smelling, that is very suspicious of STI. So the type of discharge, and you always ask about dyspareunia, because PID, whenever the patient is having upper genital tract infection or PID, she will always have dyspareunia. She will also have dysmenorrhea. So questions about dysmenorrhea, period pain, secondary dysmenorrhea, and asking her about dyspareunia, that's very important. Postcoital bleeding, okay, that's also very important, very good. Frequency of intercourse, yes. Partner suffering from any sexual, very, very important question. Partner suffering from any sexual disease. So you ask about whether your husband has, because in the West they don't talk about the husband. You know that it's a very free society in the Western countries. So if you are practicing in England, for example, or if you are practicing in Europe or America, you would like to say, is your partner has any problem? Over here, we generally say, does your husband have any problem? So you have to understand the local context and the cultural context also, because यहाँ पे आप कहते हैं, does your husband has any pain? Does he have any urethral discharge? Or does he have any pain during intercourse, or any problem, or any history? And if you're practicing in England, for example, you're going for your MRCOG exams or other MRCP exams, over there you will say, does your partner has any problem? So generally in your textbooks, it will be mentioned partners. Yes, multiple sexual partners, very, very important question, but very difficult to ask. So you have to be very culturally sensitive, because if you ask the patient, oh, do you have multiple sexual partners? That will be a very, very inappropriate question. And the patient might be feel very disrespected. She might feel angry, and she might say, what type of a question are you asking me? What do you mean? Right? So one has to be very careful. And generally, if you want to know about multiple sexual partners, first of all, we have to ask about, what do we ask generally in our context? Can anybody tell me if you want to know about multiple sexual partners? Because this is a very important question for both for the husband as well as for the wife. How do you ask? Can anybody answer me? How do you ask about multiple partners? Do you ask abruptly if that, do you have multiple partners, or do you ask something differently? Yes, very good. Who is this? This is Saifullah. Oh, that's wonderful. So, so this is our cultural sensitivity, and it's very easy to ask about marriages. We can ask because officially we are allowed to have 4 marriages in our country, and it's nobody will mind if you ask them, okay, do you have more than one marriage? That's fine. And particularly more than one marriage for the woman also, and more than one marriage for the husband also. We can ask, how is your relationship with your husband? Yes, that's also very important, Disha. That's an excellent question. Relationship with the husband, because if she's suspecting that her husband has multiple relations, she will maybe not having a good relationship with her husband, and she might say, my husband is not very good with me because I suspect that he has a girlfriend, or he has some extramarital relationship, or she has another wife also. So the safest question to ask is, do you have more than one marriages, or does your husband has another wife previous to you or after you? Does he have multiple marriages, or do you have a previous marriage? So that's a safe question. We can start with that, and then we can move forwards. And then if you want to, if the supposing the wife says, no, Dr. Saab, this is my only marriage, and my husband is the only marriage also. It's a monogamous relationship. Okay, so it's now you have come to that point that she says that it's a monogamous relationship for the husband as well as for the wife. Now, how do you ask about extramarital? That's also a very, very sensitive question, because multiple partners to ho gaye. If she says, no, this is my husband, I'm the third wife, or I'm the second wife, and he has both the wife, we both living together, and then he has a wife in the village also. So that means multiple sexual partners is positive. But supposing she says it's a monogamous, then how do you ask? So apart from relationship, now you want to know whether the husband has any extramarital. How will you ask that? Excuse me. Yes, anyone? Now you specifically want to know whether the husband is having any extramarital. Does he have a girlfriend or not? So there's an answer. Does someone try to do wrong or harass you? Okay, so okay, this is also okay, Saifullah. But maybe I think we are trying to talk about violence here, and not consent with consent, just sexual relationship with consent, or sexual relationship without consent. So that will be the different context, because that will be included in the violence or rape category. If somebody is trying to sexually harass the woman, that will come into the category of rape. Okay, so right now we are, I think, talking about consensuous relationship. What are your relations with your husband? Yes, Rasha, that's fine. You can ask about that. And then you can ask about the husband's profession also. What does he do? Occupation. Yes, that's excellent. Yes. So we asked him about, does he live with you all the time, or does he go away for long periods of time, especially if he's traveling to different countries, like for the business sake, or his profession is such that he has to travel to Thailand and to other countries. where the free relationships are available, and then she might be suspecting her husband, or you might suspect that the husband might be having extramarital relationships. So husband's occupation is important, traveling is important, and sometimes you can also very tactfully you can ask that vaginal discharge is more common, or sexually transmitted infection like HIV are more common if there are multiple partners. So you don't directly ask her that does she have multiple partners or does the husband have multiple partners, but you just ask them generally that it's more common in people who have more than one partner. So that if she wants to volunteer the information, she will volunteer. If she wants to protect the information, then she will protect it, and that's her right. So we must never press upon her that no, you have to tell me everything, or we don't force her that no, you have to tell me about your extramarital relationship, or you have to tell me about your boyfriend, or you have to tell me about your husband's girlfriend. It's a very, very private information, and it's patient's right to hide the information if she wants to hide it. We are not supposed to force them to disclose this private information, but our job is to tell them that the risk is there. If there are more than one partners, they should realize that the risk is higher, and then the treatment should also be available for everybody, not just our patient, but if she has multiple contacts or the husband has multiple contacts, then the treatment should also be offered to everybody. That is contact tracing or partner tracing, and uh, offering treatment to everybody so that the chain is broken. Otherwise, there will be recurrent infection, right? Are we clear on this? So basically, it comes with practice. We can't just talk about it theoretically. We can talk about it, but unless we try to practice and try to practice with the patient, real patient, or with the role play, I don't know how we can expose you. I'll show you some video also tomorrow in the CA cervix class. Today I don't have a video, but tomorrow's class I will tell you a video also, because when we talk about CA cervix, that's also due to sexually transmitted infection, which is human papilloma virus. So I have a video on that, and I'll be showing you that video tomorrow. But I can also show you some counseling videos where how do we talk to the patient, how do we talk about intimate questions and sexual history, very, very difficult, challenging part of the history, but it's important. Okay, so this is a very important question. Detailed sexual history is important in case of vaginal discharge only. So what do you think? Is it only important for vaginal discharge, or is it important in other contexts also? Gulrukh, I want you to answer yourself. I want you to answer first. I mean, we can also answer, but I want you to, because most of the time when you ask a question, you already know the answer, and I want you to realize that you already know the answers, and you just have to come out with them and be more confident with your answers, so that you're confident in answering the examiner also. Yes, Gulrukh, what do you think? Is it only important for vaginal discharge? Yes, so it's important with every gynecological complaint. Most of the time, it is important, whether it is CA cervix, whether it is um, even infertility key history. When patients have secondary infertility, when patients have tubal block, when patients present with PID, you have to know whether there was any suggestive history of sexually transmitted infection like gonococcus, like chlamydia. So most of the time for PID, for secondary infertility, primary infertility, for vaginal discharge, for HIV, for hepatitis, most of the time we have to take sexual history, and we need to be comfortable with it if we want to actually diagnose STI and we want to treat STI. Okay? Are we okay with this discussion on sexual history? Should we move ahead? Should we move forward? We'll be talking more about it when we discuss the case scenarios. Okay, good. So, like I said, investigation is the least important, and high vaginal swab, although it is important, in diagnosing your causative organism, whether it is Candida, whether it is Gardnerella. But again, most of the time, patient might not come back to you. One important point we must keep in mind is patient might be lost to follow up, and if we just give her a HVS and we don't give her any treatment on vaginal discharge, patient might never come back. She might go to somebody else, some GP, and the high vaginal swab, she might never go to the lab actually. So the patient may be lost to follow up, and the opportunity to treat the STI, which can have a lot of serious consequences later on, that opportunity may be lost. So patients should not be lost to follow up. Okay, so high vaginal swabs usually we don't do in the usual clinical practice, but of course they are important for diagnosing the causative organism. Endocervical swabs, we don't have the availability is a big issue, and we don't have the culture swabs for gonococcus and chlamydia. Okay, so there's a question from Rabia. What would we ask about contraceptive measures taken in case of sexual history? Yes, of course. Contraceptive history is very, very important. And for every patient, whether it's infertility patient, whether it is vaginal discharge, whether it is PID, sexual history and contraception. So overall history, the whole history is important along with sexual history and contraception history. Always we must know about whether the patient is using any contraception, because we said that vaginal discharge can be related to contraception also. Okay. So let's talk about individual infections. So we said bacterial vaginosis is the most common cause of infective discharge, as it is, it's not an STI basically, it's not sexually transmitted, but basically it is a result of change in the overgrowth of bacteria which are not naturally occurring in the vagina, that is Gardnerella and some other organisms also, like Mobilingus and other organisms. And so it is a self-generated, basically endogenous. It's not exogenous infection, but it is endogenous infection because the microorganisms undergo a change in the normal flora. And how will you take the history? What is the important points in the history? When you ask the patient about what kind of a discharge it is, what will she say most of the time? What kind of color and what kind of smell for bacterial vaginosis? So the color is usually around milky white or grey color, and it's a thin kind of discharge. It can be copious, thin discharge, but the smell is very typical. If you ask the patient about what kind of smell, and if you ask her, is it a fishy smell, patient can, if she says yes, that is highly suggestive of bacterial vaginosis because it's a typical kind of fishy smell, which fishy odor, which gives it a typical diagnosis. And patient can also complain of other associated symptoms like itching, burning, irritation, and soreness. And it can also be related to sexual intercourse. She can also say it occurs after sexual intercourse because usually the after intercourse it can become a little more alkaline, which can encourage change in the bacterial flora, and Gardnerella can become overgrown and it can cause bacterial vaginosis. So you can understand that usually we diagnose with the help of history only, but we can also do examination, and we can check for the kind of discharge. So what is the predisposing factors? Basically, the predisposing factor is the pH. The pH, if it's less acidic or more alkaline due to sexual intercourse, it can cause, it can be a predisposing factor. And what are the consequences for bacterial vaginosis are sometimes very serious, because it is some research says that it can cause ascending infection, although it's not very conclusive. Like gonococcus causes endocervicitis, and chlamydia causes cervicitis, and they can cause ascending infection. But sometimes it is said that bacterial vaginosis can also lead to ascending infection, and it can cause pelvic infection, maybe tubal block, but it's not conclusive. But it is a lot of research says that it can cause pregnancy complications like miscarriages, recurrent miscarriages, and preterm labor if there is recurrent bacterial vaginosis. So that's an important concept. So how do we diagnose? Mostly it's clinical diagnosis. Like we said, most important diagnostic factor is history, and then examination. We can measure the pH also with the pH strips, but usually we just diagnose it clinically with the help of history and with the help of examination, that is Kuskos speculum examination. We can inspect the gray discharge, white vaginal discharge, and if we can smell, if the patient says there's a fishy smell, then we can say that this is bacterial vaginosis. But if we send a HVS and we do the microscopy culture, microscopy, then we can see the clue cells. That is the typical diagnosis, because these are vaginal cells which are surrounded by the bacteria which are stuck to these vaginal cells. Can you see these clue cells? Vaginal cells which are surrounded by the bacteria, and this is the clue cell, which if we do the send the discharge for microscopy, we can diagnose with the help of clue cells. But usually we don't do all this practically when you do the in the OPD setup. We just give the patient treatment only on the basis of history and clinical examination, that is inspection, most of the time. So how do we treat bacterial vaginosis? Very simple treatment. This is just Flagyl, course of Flagyl or metronidazole. And what is the dose? I think you all know this. This is very simple treatment for bacterial vaginosis. 400 milligram BD for 7 days, or better still to give a single dose. Nowadays, all the organisms that we have for vaginal discharge, all 5 organisms, we have the single dose available. And what is the advantage of single dose? Can anybody tell me? What is better, single dose or 7 days course? What would you like to do? If you're suspecting bacterial vaginosis, or if you're suspecting trichomoniasis, what is better? Single dose, very good, very good. Why is it better? What is the advantage of single dose? If somebody asks the patient to take tablets for 7 days, how many patients do you think will? Yes, very good. Increased compliance, excellent. So a lot of patients might not like to take Flagyl or metronidazole for 7 days, because every drug has side effects, and this has a very important side effect of causing nausea. A lot of patients suffer from nausea and vomiting, and they might give up after 2 days, after 4 days. So the therapy might not be complete, and the patient might suffer from again recurrent infection. Discharge might not be treated appropriately. So it's better to give a single dose of 2 grams stat oral per oral dose. That is, it comes with the name of Secnidol Forte in the form of, it doesn't come with the name of Flagyl. Flagyl is a 400 milligram tablet, but if you want to give a single dose, it is called Secnidol. It can be given in or 2 gram, and that is a single dose. And ideally we give it for the husband also, because sometimes the infection may be passed on to the partner or to the husband. So it's better to give the husband also, right? Usually in case of pregnancy, if we are suspecting bacterial vaginosis, then we can give local infection rather than systemic treatment, Flagyl treatment or metronidazole. We can give clindamycin cream for local application, 3 to 7 nights. It's a patient can apply it herself into the vagina, and that should be adequate treatment. And clindamycin is also available in a per oral tablet form, 300 milligram. That is also BD for 7 days. Okay, so let's talk about candidiasis, vulvovaginal candidiasis. And the organism, we all know it is usually Candida albicans most of the time, but there are other species also in fungal infections, which are usually rare for vaginal candidiasis. Most of the time it is Candida. And like you all said, I think a lot of students already answered, the predisposing factors are a lot of unnecessary antibiotics, which are given by GPs. They can promote vulvovaginal candidiasis, and then it's very common infection during pregnancy, A lot of women will suffer candidiasis. Another predisposing factor is diabetes. So when we are taking a history, all these factors need to be outlined in the history. About, first of all, we talk about the discharge, what is the type of discharge, what is the color, does she have any itching. So a typical symptom will be itching also, soreness. And then we talk about antibiotic use, we talk about whether she is pregnant or any history of diabetes and any immunosuppression. If she is taking any drugs which are immunosuppressant drugs, any chemotherapy and things like that, so patient will be more likely to have candidiasis. Okay, so again, like I said, diagnosis is mostly clinical. So whenever somebody asks you about diagnosis of vaginal discharge, you have to say mostly it is clinical diagnosis, most of the time on the basis of history, and then examination, inspection, speculum examination, and you can talk about theoretically about HVS, but practically speaking, it is just history and examination. So what will the patient say in the history? What type of discharge will she have? It is a white, thick white discharge associated with itching and soreness. Typical curdy white discharge. Like if you ask them about does it look like curdy white like yogurt, and the patient will say yes, it's a thick white discharge and typically associated with itching, then it is most of the time it is candidiasis. Although it can be a mixed infection, it can be mixed with bacterial vaginosis and other infection, but candidiasis is there for most likely infection. And so we can examine it also, we can inspect the thick white discharge, and we can see the soreness on the vulva, because if she has a lot of pruritus, itching, the vulva will be reddish and hyperemic, and that will further confirm that the patient has having a lot of itching, and that is due to candida infection. And then investigations, if you want to do, we can do HVS for culture. We can see the gram staining, yeast cells will be visible, and then microscopy also, that will further confirm that it is candida. Okay, so how do we treat? Treatment is also very simple. We can use vaginal pessaries, vaginal creams, but most of the time nowadays we prefer to use oral treatment. And like I said, single dose is the best treatment. And for all the organisms, we have the single dose available now. So it's always best to give a single dose. And single dose is available in fluconazole, 150 milligram per oral, only once, only one capsule, 150 milligram. It comes with the name of different brand names. You can check out the brand names on the internet, but it is fluconazole and some other azoles also now. And the dose is 150 milligram, single capsule. And we usually again give the partner also, treatment of the partner also, because we want to be sure that she doesn't have recurrent infection, and the fungal infection can also be transferred to the husband also, although it is not sexually transmitted. So but we can also use vaginal pessaries nystatin के form में, or we can use clotrimazole 200 milligram daily for 3 days, or 500 milligram, a single pessary, which is again the compliance issue. Always think about the compliance issue. Patient may be not very compliant to treatment, so we should try to prefer single dose. Even if we are giving vaginal pessary, single dose is better, 500 milligram once only, that is better. And cream can be given for 7 days. 1% cream clotrimazole can be given for 7 days, and then local application, canesten vaginal cream for vulval application also comes. That is also local treatment for 7 days. Okay, so let's talk about the STIs now. Trichomonas vaginitis, that is the sexually transmitted infection, parasitic infection, and it's caused by Trichomonas vaginalis. So if we are suspecting this treatment, then that means we have to screen the patient for other STIs as well. That means if we are suspecting any one's STI, then that means she might be having other STIs also. She might be having gonococcus, she might be having chlamydia. So it's not just treatment for trichomonas, but we will always give treatment for all STIs. All three STIs treatment will have to be given because, like we discussed, we don't have the culture media for gonococcus and chlamydia. But if there is one STI, there can be other STIs also most of the time, mixed infection. So the treatment will be given for all STIs. This is important practically, that we don't just treat for trichomonas. If we are suspecting one STI, we treat for all STIs. Okay? And we treat the partner also. Another important point is we treat all STIs and we treat the partner or the husband always, because it's an STI. It is not going to go away if you give treatment only to the patient. It will not be enough. The patient has to understand that her husband has to take the treatment in order to completely eliminate the STI, all the infections from both the partners. So diagnosis is again clinical diagnosis. And what will the patient say? What is the color of discharge? This will be yellowish or greenish offensive discharge, frothy discharge. So typically this is more like purulent, greenish and foul smelling and frothy. And when we examine the patient, typically there can be excoriation, there can be erythema, and there can be cervical hemorrhages, although not in all cases, but in 2% of cases we might find the cervix looks red due to the typical ulceration and hemorrhages. This is called strawberry cervix in some patients, very few patients, but if we find strawberry cervix, this is a diagnostic feature for Trichomonas vaginalis. And again, infections, theoretically, the investigations are important, like HVS and microscopy, to find the motile parasite, trichomoniads, but again, usually not required, and clinical diagnosis only on the basis of history and examination. For speculum examination, if we see this greenish discharge and if we see the reddish cervix, then we diagnose trichomonas. And the treatment is the same. So BV and TB both have the same treatment. Whenever you are suspecting either bacterial vaginosis, BV, or trichomonas, that is TB, the treatment is the same. So if you give metronidazole, that is going to treat two of your organisms automatically. For example, if we are suspecting BV and we give treatment, if she also has a mixed infection with trichomonas, that will automatically be treated with metronidazole, right? So 400 milligram flagyl BD for 7 days, or better to give 2 gram per oral single dose. And this works for both BV and TB, that is trichomonas as well as bacterial vaginosis. Okay. So let's talk about the other very common STI, that is chlamydia trachomatis. This is again very common, but we don't know how common in Pakistan because we don't have the data here, we don't have the culture media, so we are never able to say how much chlamydia we have in Pakistan. Whatever the data is available is from Western countries, which may or may not apply to our own population, to our own women, because we don't have our own data. So usually, again, we diagnose this clinically. What will be the history? History of virulent, foul-smelling vaginal discharge, and not always symptomatic. Patient may not give history of any discharge. 80% of women may be completely asymptomatic. So that means, what do? How do we treat chlamydia? If 80% of women are without any symptoms, no vaginal discharge, and they may just, we might just suspect she might be having trichomonas, she might be having vaginal discharge due to other causes, but it is important to treat chlamydia even without symptoms, because 80% of women will not be having any discharge. It's only 20 to 30% of women who have this foul-smelling purulent discharge. And the important thing to remember is that the consequence is quite serious consequences. It leads to PID in 5 to 10% of cases, and this PID is a very morbid condition because it can cause primary infertility, secondary infertility, it can cause ectopic pregnancy, it can cause chronic pelvic pain, which is a very morbid condition, severe pain sometimes, it can cause dyspareunia, it can cause dysmenorrhea, and affect the quality of life of the patient very, very morbidly. And so sexual history is important. It's basically on the basis of even no vaginal discharge. This may be treated on the basis of sexual history, on the basis of vaginal discharge. Overall, if she has discharge, then we always treat chlamydiasis also, because we can't diagnose it specifically. There is no specific diagnosis available. So treatment is very simple. That's why we always treat without doing any diagnostic test. We don't do any culture test. We don't do any HVS in this case because it's not available. So we give treatment empirically, and the treatment is very simple. It's vibramycin, that is doxycycline, 100 milligram twice daily for 7 days. But this is contraindicated in pregnancy. This must always be remembered, that doxycycline is contraindicated in pregnancy, and if we want to treat in pregnancy, then we always give azithromycin, which can also be given outside pregnancy. It is safe in pregnancy, but it's also very, because this is a single dose treatment. We don't have single dose treatment for doxycycline, but we have single dose treatment for azithromycin. This is 1 gram per oral, single dose, and treatment of the partner is very important. And again, this is given empirically on the basis of history and examination. Okay. Okay. So the last infection, the last STI is the gonococcus or gonorrhea, which is caused by Neisseria gonorrhoeae. You all know that. And again, the typical history will be purulent, foul smelling, pussy discharge, vaginal discharge. But again, 50% cases are asymptomatic and they will have no discharge, but will be having this STI. And again, the complications are the same, just like chlamydia. It can cause PID, it can cause ectopic, it can cause chronic pelvic pain, infertility, dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, and sexual history is very important. So again, the treatment is empirical treatment on the basis of clinical diagnosis, and the treatment is very simple. It's a single dose. Nowadays, it's a single dose, 1 capsule of cefspan or cefixime. This is 3rd generation cephalosporin, only 1 capsule, 400 milligram per oral as a single dose, and the treatment of the partner is also very important. So what do we do now? So what does the WHO say? The conclusion of this talk, the whole this session, conclusion is, according to the WHO recommendation and the evidence base, we are going to treat vaginal discharge as a syndrome. WHO says vaginal discharge is not a single complaint, it is a syndrome of multiple complaints and multiple features, multiple clinical features, and it should be treated as a syndrome. Do not treat one infection only, but treat it as a syndrome and treat all 5 infections, because we cannot rule out any infection. We don't have the cultures. We don't know whether the patient has STI or not. So it is better to treat STI even without any evidence and without doing any cultures, right? So this is the evidence-based, although some people might argue that aren't we doing over-treatment? If the patient only has candidiasis, why should we give treatment for chlamydia? Why should we give treatment for gonorrhea? And why should we give treatment for trichomonas? If she only has candida, why don't we give her just fungal? So that's fine. The argument is valid that we are over treating, but because the consequences of STIs are very bad, and there may be serious consequences like infertility, like ectopic pregnancy. So if we are giving single doses and we are treating all infections, all organisms in one go, then WHO says it is justified, because we are just giving 1 capsule for each infection. We are giving a single dose for every treatment. to the wife and to the husband or to the partner, and at the cost of a little bit over treatment, but we are treating all 5 organisms as a syndrome, which is better for the patient, and it will treat the vaginal discharge as well as it will prevent the consequences of STI, because 3 of them are STIs which can be recurrent infections and which can. So let's talk about a couple of case scenarios. Final years, some MCQs for you, and we are going to discuss these. So this is a young 18-year-old unmarried girl who presents with history of vaginal discharge for last 2 to 3 months. Her discharge is plain white color, whitish, non-itchy, not foul smelling. What is your most probable diagnosis, or what is the most probable cause of a discharge? What is your answer? Bacterial vaginosis, candidiasis, leukorrhea, gonorrhea? Okay, so I already got the answers. So this is wonderful. This is excellent. The answer is leukorrhea, because we said this is an unmarried girl. So if you get this question in your, you might get this question in your actual theory exam. If this is an unmarried girl, young girl, 18-year-old, although in a Western society or even in our society, she might be sexually active. Okay, so don't forget that, because being unmarried and 18-year-old does not rule out sexual activity, particularly in the Western society, but I would say in our society also. So the importance of sexual history is always there in order to rule out, but this is a clean-cut scenario. You have to choose the best answer, right? So here the answer will be leukorrhea, because the discharge is plain white, non-itchy, not foul smelling, and she obviously seems to be non-infective kind of discharge. So what is the answer? Let's look at the answer. Your answer is absolutely correct. Okay, so there is one contest, bacterial vaginosis. Why not? Why, this can be bacterial vaginosis also. What is the best answer? We are saying all of these answers might be correct, because 18-year-old girl might be sexually active also. Because if you're suspecting bacterial vaginosis, usually it's an alkaline medium, which occurs after intercourse also, and for other STIs also. So the answer, the question is valid. Alpha is asking why not A? A is also possible, but what will be the best answer in the young girl who's unmarried, who's not sexually active, who will be having normal pH of the vagina and normal flora? So most likely she's having a normal menstrual cycle. She doesn't have any foul smell, no fishy smell, no itching. So what is the best answer? That's why it's not bad. Yes, the answer has come from Aiza. Not foul smelling, non-itchy, that's why it's not bacterial vaginosis. Yes, that's right. So do you agree with us, Alpha? Do you agree that most likely answer is, or the best answer will be leukorrhea or C? Okay. Yes, okay, thank you. Great. So next question, 42-year-old, para 3, presented with history of vaginal itching and discharge for last 2 weeks. Discharge is thick and white in color. She's a known diabetic for last 5 years. What is the most probable cause of a vaginal discharge? So the answer is very clear. So these questions, because this is a very, very simple topic. I think you all have the right concept. These are only 5 organisms for infection that you have to try and understand. The history is very simple. Particularly in candidiasis, you have to have the risk factors in the history. If she is diabetic and she is complaining of itching, vaginal itching, vulval itching, and thick curdy white discharge, then this most likely answer is B. That's excellent. Correct answer. The answer is B. This is very simple. Okay. Okay, let's have the next one. 22-year-old nulliparous. This is a nulliparous woman presented with history of foul smelling, pussy discharge, blood stained vaginal discharge for last 1 month. First speculum examination shows yellow pus which is coming out through the cervix. What is the most probable cause of her vaginal discharge? Bacterial vaginosis, candidiasis, chlamydia, leucorrhea, or trichomonas? What is the answer? Most likely answer? Yes, final years? So Hamza is saying E, mine is saying chlamydia. Anybody else? Let's have some other responses. Shawal is saying E, A. Okay, chlamydia. Arfa is saying chlamydia, yes, okay. Anything else? Anybody else? A couple of more responses, maybe? Because I want to have the majority for the answers. A few more. I want some people who do not respond to also respond, because people who are responding are always the same people who are responding, and those who are not responding are not responding. That's not a good thing, actually. People who are responding, there are few people who always respond, I think, and there are a lot of people, the majority, who's not responding. I don't know why, but I would be very happy if those who are not responding also try to respond. Yes? E. So the majority answer is coming out as trichomonas. Why? I don't know why. Because the correct answer is actually chlamydia. Like Isa and Farah are saying chlamydia, and there was somebody else also. So this answer is actually chlamydia, because the pus is coming from inside the cervix, and we said there are two organisms which cause PID, which cause ascending infection starting from the cervix, because they involve the endocervix. If you see the pus, आपने speculum डाला, cuscose डाला, and you see the cuscose and you see the cervix and you see the pus is coming from inside the cervix, that means it's coming from inside the uterus. So that means this is not vaginitis, this is cervicitis. And cervicitis, we have two organisms, either gonococcus or chlamydia. So the contest is between gonococcus and chlamydia. That's why I've not given you gonococcus, because I don't want to confuse you between gonococcus and chlamydia. That's why I only gave one PID organism, one cause of cervicitis, which is chlamydia. If I had given you gonococcus, then that would have been a wrong question, because both the answers would be absolutely correct. Gonococcus would be correct and chlamydia would be correct. But here there's no gonococcus and only chlamydia, which is a cause of cervicitis. Trichomonas does not cause cervicitis. It causes strawberry cervix, but it causes vaginitis only vaginal discharge, but the pus does not come from inside the uterus. That should be always remembered, that only two organisms cause cervicitis and PID, which is gonococcus. It causes cervicitis, endometritis, and salpingitis, and chlamydia. So I hope I'm clear to Anas and Hafsa and Recha, Ramesh. Those who are thinking E, I think they are not wrong, because they are thinking about STI. That's fine. This is yellow discharge, this is pussy discharge, and foul smelling. So it is an STI. You are very right. That is a correct diagnosis. But remember, this is also coming, your pus speculum is showing you that the pus is coming from inside the cervix. That means this is something above the vagina, and something which is causing cervicitis and endometritis. So that can only be chlamydia, or it can be gonorrhea, because gonorrhea is not, gonococcus is not given. So your answer will be chlamydia. So those who said chlamydia have got the right answer, and I hope everybody is clear about it now. Are we clear on it? Do we all agree now? Okay, great. Thank you. But isn't STI supposed to involve cervix? No. Yes, STI are supposed to involve cervix. So STI are basically those infections which are causing ascending infection are only two. Trichomonas is an STI, but it is limited to vagina. That's I think there is some confusion. I have not been able to make it clear that all STIs do not cause cervicitis. Although trichomonas is an STI, but it causes vaginitis only, and it causes hemorrhages over the external cervix. That is strawberry cervix होता है, red होता है, but internal lining of the cervix is not involved in trichomonas. It does not cause ascending infection. It does not cause cervicitis, endometritis, salpingitis, and PID. So this is a very important question, Amna, that isn't STI supposed to involve cervix? So two of the STIs are supposed to involve cervix, that is chlamydia and gonococcus, but not trichomonas, although STI, but it usually does not involve endocervix. Are we clear on this, Amna? And others, of course, because this is a very important discussion. And the usual confusion is about STIs. Are we clear? Okay, great. Okay. So another question, one more I think. A 30-year-old married woman presented with history of whitish, foul smelling and itchy vaginal discharge for last 1 month. Mostly occurs after intercourse. What is the most likely cause of her vaginal discharge? Bacterial vaginosis, candidiasis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomonas, A, B, C, D, E. What do you say final year? She's a married woman, foul smelling, discharge, itchy, follows after intercourse. Follows after intercourse. Be careful about the history that is given to you in the case. So if it is occurring mostly after intercourse, if the patient is saying most of the time she has to discharge after intercourse and it's very foul smelling, although the case scenario is not saying what type of smell it is, but it is saying foul smelling and irritating and itchy. So what do you think? So most of you have got it correct. Yes, bacterial vaginosis. So that is excellent. Yes. So this is bacterial vaginosis, and the important thing that the clue that is present in this scenario is that it follows after intercourse, because itching can occur after candidiasis also. Some people said B. So you are right that this can be candidiasis because it has got itching, but remember, candida never causes foul smell. Candidal infection is never foul smelling. There's no smell in candidal infection, although it is itching and soreness and vulva becomes hyperemic and red, a lot of pruritus and itching, but no foul smell. If we are saying it is a foul smelling discharge, usually follows sexual intercourse, and it is although typical clue आपको नहीं मिल रहा है यहाँ पे, it's not saying fishy smell, but foul smelling, itchy discharge follows after intercourse. These are the clues which point toward. This is not STI because this is not a pussy discharge. The color is white. Okay, so white discharge and pussy discharge. STI will always cause yellow discharge. Remember the color also. Remember your history, and remember that we are only diagnosing on the basis of history and at the most examination. But here the scenarios are only talking about history. So your history may aapka your remember the color. If it is whitish, it can't be STI. Okay, Arfa? And STIs are usually purulent discharge. Smelling, but although this is foul smelling, but this is whitish discharge. And whitish and foul smelling is bacterial vaginosis. Foul smelling and purulent pussy discharge or yellow discharge or green discharge will be STI. So the color is important. Smell is important and itching is important. How do we, so there's a question, how do we differentiate the discharge of allergic response from discharge of candidiasis? Okay, so that will come again with the history. When you're taking a good history, I think we should ask the patient, is she using tampons? And some patients use tampons. Some people use different kinds of pads, which can be allergic. Patient से पूछना है कि आपको allergy तो नहीं होती? Are you using any chemicals? Are you using any lotions? Are you using any creams over the vulva? Are you using any vaginal creams? Because allergic response can be in response to any chemical, or it can be in response to any tampons or any sanitary pads. So that will only come with the history. If she's saying ki, yes, I use tampons, then we have to do an examination also. If there's a retained tampon, we got to rule out the tampons retained, or chemicals, or vaginal creams that she's using, or if she's using any lotions. Some people use hair removing creams that can cause allergic response, but usually they are not causing vaginal discharge, but they cause itching. They usually cause a lot of pruritus, hyperemia, and uh, allergic response, usually vulval response, but not vaginal. But we have to rule out all this with the help of allergies, and with the help of history, with the help of what she's using actually. Okay. So, is this clear? Is this scenario clear? That is this bacterial vaginosis? Final years? Do we agree that this is bacterial vaginosis and not candidiasis and not STI? Because although this is foul smelling, but this is white discharge, and this is following after regular sexual intercourse. So patients will say that whenever they have intercourse, a few days after that, she has a lot of discharge, which is foul smelling, and may become less intense afterwards, but again after discharge, it becomes more intense. Okay. Okay. Thank you, final years. I think we are done with the discussion and with the PowerPoint. But now there's time for, I think we have time for a few questions.